In my opinion, the Patient Self-Determination Act of 1990 is the father of advanced care planning. This federal law's laudable goal is to extend patients' autonomy regarding how and when they die beyond their loss of capacity. The Patient Self-Determination Act requires patients be informed that they have two rights. Um, these are institutions that accept Medicare and Medi-Cal. Patients can complete an advanced instructional directive, also known as a living will, that memorializes their end-of-life conditional treatment requests. And patients can designate an individual whom they trust, called a proxy or agent or surrogate, to make treatment decisions based on substituted judgment, which means they take their working mind, their functioning mind, and they know the values, the treatment preferences of the patient, and put the two together to make a decision for treatment. The professionals who established the legislation, or the rules and regulations that created the pulse paradigm and dictated how pulse should be used in practice, are to me the current disciples, and they represent the traditional approach. Here is my prayer. O Father and disciples who currently make the rules, I have not sinned. I do not ask you for your forgiveness. Instead, I will continue to pursue my 2-decade mission. I will present to other healthcare providers what I believe is best for patients so they can decide whether they agree. That is, the providers can decide. And what do I believe is best for patients? To have control over the last chapter of their lives so they have a dying that is timely, that is neither premature nor prolonged, and also peaceful, so patients are not forced to endure prolonged, irreversible, severe suffering. An extensive literature review might lead the readers of our article to conclude that advance directives by themselves are merely weak requests for conditional future treatment that may not succeed, especially if patients need the controversial intervention such as cease-assisted oral feeding and hydrating. And this is a paper that was published last year with my colleagues Carl Steinberg and Nathaniel Heinerman. Another extensive literature review may lead its readers to conclude that asking surrogates to express their substituted judgment to make treatment decisions for incapacitated patients should be abandoned based on abundant evidence that the practice cannot be expected to facilitate patients attaining end-of-life goal concordant care. That is, they will get the care that they want to get, which is the holy grail of advanced care planning. And this article will be submitted next week. Another question for you. Why is advanced dementia so challenging when it comes to advanced care planning? And this is a hint, this little graphic. The answer is because their patients very often have no plug to pull. Sustaining the patient's life does not depend on medical technology that can be withheld or withdrawn to allow a natural death. To overcome this challenge, patients need the order to withdraw assisted oral feeding and hydrating. And as I mentioned, dying is timely in two ways. After suffering has become severe and irreversible by reaching one of those conditions, and for the process of dying to be peaceful by taking fewer than 2 weeks when it's implemented. But this order is controversial, and physicians and providers and other authorities may use their power to refuse to honor requests to write or implement orders that conform. Yet it could be patients' last resort. Example, AMDA, which is the old term for a longer title, the Society for Post-Acute Care and Post-Acute and Long-Term Care, has 5,000 providers who care for patients in long-term facilities, and they adopted a policy of comfort feeding for all nursing home and assisted living facility residents with advanced dementia. And here's the part to pay attention to, despite any advanced directives to the contrary. So they're willing to go beyond contrary, even if there's a conflict with the living will. I have developed over the last decade or two strategic advanced care planning, which is a protocol designed to help patients that are living with advanced dementia and other terminal illnesses avoid being forced to suffer prolonged dying. And it has three components or tasks. Task one is to go through the illustrated My Way cards, and I'll give you some examples. They are readable at the third grade level because we want to make it possible for early stage dementia patients to use them. And it generates what I call a natural dying living will, which strives to be clear, convincing, specific, and comprehensive, and uses one criterion: irreversible, severe enough suffering, as the sole and ideally compelling criteria. So it's not typical in the United States, but the protocol requires patients' initial treatment decisions for 50 conditions, which is much more than usual, to be discussed with a provider, a clinician. And then once the reconsideration of responses reaches a final point where the patient agrees that once the patient feels that they've come to decisions that are right for them in terms of their values, lifelong values, and their treatment preferences, then the provider will conduct a video interview that memorializes patients' oral testimony of their final decisions, although they can always change their mind and their living will if they have capacity. And this is an important innovation which makes a big difference in success, that clinicians do have input that they share with patients during their advanced care planning. All right, now we come to our first heretical point. During advanced care planning, patients judge whether each condition would cause severe enough suffering. Conditions include end-of-life and dementia conditions, some of which cannot be observed or appreciated and therefore may not be treated. Traditionally, physicians, that's not the patients, judge suffering contemporaneously, not during advanced care planning. So now providers will be only asked to assess if patients have reached these conditions. And while that's very important, some providers will object. They're not allowed to function in all of their traditional roles, taking something away from them. Not good. Resistance, opposition. Task two is to complete a document that includes the natural dying agreement with over a dozen strategies, the summary affidavit so it can be admitted to a court of law as evidence, and the durable power of attorney for healthcare decisions, and it is a bilateral contract between the patient and the proxy agent surrogate that empowers this person to make some advanced treatment decisions irrevocable. And that also forms a patient decision committee to make the final decisions, as I will describe later. Task three is to complete future posts. And during advanced care planning. Why is this heretical? Because posts are supposed to be completed contemporaneously when later on. But why is task three, why is the third task three, the way it is? Because of two advantages. The posts are immediately actionable and are binding. A, because they are immediately actionable, there's no time to interpret, discuss, or engage in conflict where surrogates must try to justify implementing the order. And I'll give you an example from the California Post. Look what it says on the physician orders. First, follow these orders, then contact the physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant. So that's very important, that the immediate actionable. The other reason is that the law says in many states that other providers must honor the orders on a post. So that's why it's binding. It's binding legally, and it's also binding legally and clinically. Clinically and legally. Now, compared to the effectiveness of pulse, what word or words would characterize reasonable expectations for advance directives, living wills? I'll give you a hint, another question. 6 letters and they begin with P. It is please. Advance directives, living wills are merely a set of patient's unilateral requests. They don't force anyone to do anything. Yes, physicians are obligated to consider them, but they may consider these requests along with other considerations, such as what they feel is the patient's best interest, and that can differ. And therefore, you end up with something like AMSA saying that in the extreme. So, laws in most states require healthcare providers to follow post orders, and for each post, patients must insist the implemented orders be consistent with their living will. If they say on each post, no one but they can sign a new post. And that may have helped the patient who had the religious sister, as you can imagine. But here is another major heretical problem. Traditionally, to be eligible for completing posts, patient must be frail or seriously ill or terminally ill or expected to die within a year. But by that time, all will have lost decisional capacity. So the advantage of completing posts during advanced care planning is that patients can still speak for themselves. Another somewhat heretical intervention is that advanced security technology using a remote online notary can verify the identity of the patient and can validate key documents that were not modified since they were signed, and this can prevent fraud and in turn help surrogates convince providers to honor the controversial order that's needed, cease assisted feeding. Here are some examples. So those are the 3 tests. Going back to number 1, some examples of the My Way cards. You'll see 10 cards out of a total of 50. One of the most common conditions is that I don't want my life to be prolonged if I no longer can recognize my close relatives, my family. And we have on the left and right, that condition applies to both of these patients. But there's a spectacular difference between the two. On the left, we have a patient who seems to be just sitting there, even though the tremendous effort by the grandkids, hi grandpop, and the distress and sadness of his, say, son and daughter-in-law. So on the right, another patient who cannot recognize the people around him, is still enjoying them. He's singing along with the music from the boombox that his grandson is playing, as his granddaughter gives him a little massage, and his son and daughter are enjoying this and the interaction as they dance. So very different. You certainly don't want to allow the patient on the right to die. And you certainly do want to, or could, allow the patient on the left to die by cease-assisted feeding. So here are some other examples of my way cards. In 7.6, we have a very difficult issue where the patient is there in body, but not there in mind. My body looks like me, but my mind has changed a lot, and I'm very different from the person I used to be. And in 5.2, here we have a person who is sad, has lost interest and energy, cannot share with others, cannot enjoy being with other people. He may be suffering from social isolation because one of the consequences of losing the ability to communicate is losing the ability to interact with other people. When those relationships die, there's an existential loss of relationships, and it can leave someone in total social isolation. Sometimes in 8.3, assisted feeding gets to the point where it really is forced feeding because caregivers place soft pureed food at the back of the tongue, which makes swallowing by reflex. Not natural. 1.2 is where the loss is one of disruption of life narrative, where someone had the roles of being a spouse or friend or parent or grandparent or friends that enjoyed career or job hobbies with and cannot continue in these roles. This is not observable, but it's still very important source of suffering. Many people would say that if I act in ways, 1.5, that are really going to hurt my spouse, then I don't want my life to be prolonged. We can discuss this. First of all, adultery is not penalized by capital punishment. It's not the punishment for adultery is not capital. And secondly, she's having a good time. So, but there are some people who said, I would never want to do that to my spouse. And they insist on that. Some people, at 4.5, some people feel that it's a state of indignity to have their diapers changed by someone else. And others say that's their job, let them do it, clean me up, spray a little, open the window, and we're all set. The burdens on family in 7.2 are financial, and in 7.3 are physical, they're also emotional, of course. I would like to start off our Q&A with a short survey, 9 questions. And the ideal way to do this would be to go to tinyurl.com/future-post on your cell phone. And don't worry about capitalizations. Alternatively, you can go down to chat and send your opinions to Nate. The first question is yes or no, and all the others, I'll show you in a moment, are are on a scale, a Likert scale, which is strongly agree to strongly disagree, SA, SD. And in the middle, there's neither strong agree or disagree. So strong, agree, mildly, or mildly disagree, disagree, and strongly disagree. So this is what it looks on your cell phone. And well, let's see from a show of hands, to how many was the term future post new to you until today or this? Okay. And the second is, I have personal knowledge that a new surrogate completed post can override my living will or my previous post and result in treatment that I do not want. So please answer that question. And now, without the benefit of the scale, just if you're using the abbreviations, the initials. Question 2. I have personal knowledge that a new surrogate completed post can override my past living will or my previous post and result in treatment that I do not want. Question 3. I know others whose new surrogate completed post did not override their past living will or past post and resulted in treatment they did not want. Question number 4. By calling an ambulance and signing a new post, the religious sister of the 84-year-old patient who was living with dementia and then got pneumonia committed fraud because she knowingly consented to treatment that the patient did not want. So answer those 3 questions, and we'll go to the next. Completing future posts during advanced care planning is not acceptable because to be eligible to complete posts, patients must be frail, seriously or terminally ill, or expected to die within a year. This is a traditional point of view. 6, future posts can likely help patients attend end-of-life goal concordant care, which is defined as being allowed to die how and when patients want, as expressed during advanced care planning. And the last R, I will recommend others complete future posts during advanced care planning if you are a provider or if you are an interested person. And I intend to revise my own advanced care planning by completing my own set of future posts. So, and finally, while heretical in a secular sense, future posts can likely help patients receive the treatment that they want. Strongly disagree to strongly agree. A couple of centuries ago, Arthur Schopenhauer stated that all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. And third, it is accepted as being self-evident. Doesn't leave much room for credit where due. And I'm not exactly sure what stage I'm in, but let's end with that. And I thank you for your attention, your participation. And this is how to contact me to get further information.